Welcome everyone. Thank you for the privilege and the honor of speaking together today about this new initiative, Dementia Friendly Baltimore County. My name is Emily Kearns. I'm the coordinator of this initiative, and I am working with in the Department of Aging, Baltimore County, the Caregivers Program. So again, I'm honored to be with you today. If you look in the corner here on the screen, you can see this exuberant being full of all kinds of elements. And I want us to keep this etched in our minds and our hearts as we go through this session together today. You'll see, a heart and a moon and a sun, and you'll also see some challenging images. And this represents who we are as whole beings, whether we're cognitively oriented or if we're somewhat challenged. But look at the hope and look at the energy in the person facing the horizon. And this is really the person that I want us to remember and think about as we start talking about how to grow dementia-friendly communities that support us as whole beings, vibrant, exuberant beings. So today we're going to do several things. First of all, we'll speak about the need. Why now? Why show up for dementia? Why have this new initiative? There's so many needs. We'll talk about the need for inclusion and access and equity for all living people, including those with challenges such as dementia. We'll talk about the hope. Why focus on this? What can we really do when there's no cure? We'll talk about the vision. What does it look like to become dementia friendly? We're part of a national movement, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. The resources are there. There are other communities who have gone before us, and we can learn from their best practices and also their challenges. And there'll be an invitation at the end. How can we respond individually in our own lives, but also as a community? So join us, and thank you for this session, for being here. So let's start where we stand. Where are we starting from? Let me ask you to think together and individually, what comes to mind when we hear the word dementia? If we were to create a word cloud right now, what would it look like? What are some of your words? They would probably be forgetfulness, memory loss. Some of the dominant images really are of an elder in a dark room, pretty much alone. The lights are, as I said, dark and dim. It's low energy, and it's pretty depressing. But what if we could change that image? Because what the younger dementia advocates say is between the time of diagnosis and death, and we're all heading in the same direction from the day we're born, there's a lot of good living to do. So why is that image? Why is this negative word cloud what we carry around with us individually, but also in our conversations and in our organizations, even in our faith communities? We can change that, and that's what today's conversation is about. Why also focus on dementia? Because of the demographic press. We all know someone living with memory challenges. Maybe many of us here today are living with memory challenges. They're invisible, right? And we don't often share this with other people. We'll talk about what the statistics look like. 1 out of 3 individuals over 80 are living with Alzheimer's. 1 out of 9 folks 65 and older are living with Alzheimer's. So it's with us. Why not make space for it? Why not grow supports for it? So dementia phobia actually really, really represents well this dark time that we're in, this fear and phobia of even speaking about dementia. Psychology Today in May of 2013 wrote an article that introduced this term, and they talked about research that says that we have a lot of information about dementia, but it's not changing our hearts. It's still not getting us off of this fear dime, and it's in part due to what's being called the tragedy narrative. It's just what I spoke about. If you think about movies and books like Still Alice, maybe you've seen it, where she writes out suicide instructions, when she becomes diagnosed with dementia, and then later she can't follow through on it because she's too far along. All of us are filled with terror, right? When we see that kind of narrative. That is an example of the tragedy narrative. It raises money, sure, for a cure, but it doesn't help us show up for ourselves and for one another in a really positive, community supportive way. So, what are we afraid of? We're afraid, I think, and I'd love to hear your ideas. Weigh in, join our movement, and tell us what you're thinking. But one of my thoughts is that we're afraid of being left behind. So Thomas Friedman, perhaps you know him, the Pulitzer Prize author who wrote The World is Flat. he has a great book, one of my favorites, called Thank You for Being Late. And in that book, he talks about this time in history as the age of acceleration, unlike any other time in history. And what's profound, even though he does this deep and dense scientific review of the different types of accelerations, including technology mediating, really running our lives, he asks the profound question, the critical question that I ask us all to consider today. As we race faster and faster, who is left behind? Who cannot keep up? And I suggest that it's folks with not only physical challenges and different abilities, but also many of us who are living with invisible challenges, mental health challenges, cognitive challenges, memory challenges. So he asks us to think about this, who is left behind? And then the last chapter is most provocative, and I put it forth to all of us today. What can we do to support those who are left behind? How can we respond as communities in our cities, in our more rural areas? How can we become more aware of their challenges and show up and support them in their day-to-day life? So let's pause for a moment and think about how this plays out in our day-to-day life. When we wake up in the morning, what's one of the first things we do? Oftentimes we make coffee, right? And it's automated now, right? We have a timer. We also check our emails. We have to log in. We have to remember our account username and our password. Let's say we need money. We go to the ATM. We need our PIN. We want to park our car. We need to, there's my Boston accent. We need to park our car. We need to remember which app to use and our license plate number. And we have to coordinate the many steps at the machine. Online shopping, if we want an item through Amazon, we need to remember our account information anyway. So you see where I'm going with this. He's right, Friedman is right. At every touch point in our community, we often have to manage technology. I went to a session the other day in Cromwell Valley Park, a wonderful session with Towson students on birding. And they were focusing on the apps. And while they were absolutely wonderful on their small phones, I was using the dementia lens to try to imagine how folks with cognitive challenges could sit here and actually be part of this conversation and access the apps. And I actually grew kind of sad because I could feel them being left behind, not being able to access the bird songs because they couldn't get into the apps. So I think that's part of our fear. Definitely stigmatized, but I also think it's because if we are not computer or mind oriented, we can't navigate the day-to-day. Also, another piece that's really important that I want us to think about is, this research done by Blue Zones. I don't know if you've heard of it before, but this research was funded by the National Geographic, years ago, and they wanted to find out what the key factors were to longevity. So they went around the world, really amazing research, you've got to check it out. They went around the world and identified the communities where the most 100-year-old pluses, the most centurions were living. And they interviewed them to try to find out, as I said, what factors contributed to their long life. They found the usual suspects, they found diet, exercise, isolation, but the one surprise really changed my life, and I bring it to you today to consider. They found that a sense of purpose helps us live longer. One of the participants in their research, an Okinawan woman, and this is translated, she said, "Every day I wake knowing I'm loved and expected to love." So I ask us to think in that scenario we just walked through together at all those touch points. How do we know we're valued when we're going so fast? When it's the computer that tells us we're valued, if it grants us access to our loved ones through our emails or our Facebook, or the computer may say, "Nope, wrong password, you have to reset your password." How do folks know, how do we know we're valued? And also, how do we have a sense of purpose? If we can no longer navigate the technology and run so fast, what is our purpose? My father, and you should know that one of the things that brought me here today and to this work is that both of my parents lived with and passed with dementia. And it was a real reframe for me, an awakening. I changed my career and I changed my sense of being with other people. One of the things that changed me was that he would walk around the nursing home toward the end of his life and he would say repeatedly, "What's a man to do here? What's a man to do here?" A brilliant mathematician, musician, photographer. Here suddenly, well, not suddenly, but over time, he lacked purpose and lacked a sense of value. All right, so let's do a little bit of dementia awareness, just so we're on the same page. You know, in our vernacular, in our day-to-day, the word dementia and Alzheimer's are used interchangeably, but actually, as you can see in this image, dementia is an umbrella term. And you know, with more and more research, they're finding there's more and more, there are different types of dementia. So when my father was diagnosed, he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. By the time my mother was diagnosed, they really couldn't get a handle on what she was living with. So they gave her the diagnosis of mixed dementia. But we know there are other types. Lewy body, Robin Williams, for example, is someone that we all know now, and he lived with and passed from Lewy body dementia challenges. And so here you see this frontal temporal. Now, even though there's not a cure, it's real important to get a proper diagnosis. So I tell all my friends and clients, make sure you get 2 or 3 opinions, because with ageism, one of the things we're seeing is that primary doctors who don't have the training and others are saying, you're old, of course you have Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is only one specific and the most common, however, type of dementia. But you could very well have vascular dementia or Lewy bodies. What's real important is to know what kind you have, because there are different medications that can support different symptoms, decrease different symptoms, and there are also behavioral modifications. So I'm not a medical person, this isn't a medical talk, but I just wanted to make sure that you leave here with a sense of a purple umbrella and you know that there's a wide range of diseases. The other thing I want you to know is a wonderful bumper sticker saying, you meet one person with dementia, you've met one person with dementia. So even though there are 2 or 3 people that all have the same diagnosis, they manifest differently depending on the person's personality, their own history, life history, what they did in their life, and such. So it's not a specific disease, as I said, the general term. The other thing I want to share with you is memory loss is just one example of the sign and symptom of dementia. Personality change can be another. And what's really important to know is that there are what I call dementia imposters. Sometimes folks are living often with depression, especially during the pandemic, right? Depression due to the social isolation. And these depression can have dementia symptoms. But we also know that depression can be treatable with medication, with therapy, with communal supports. Also UTIs, urinary tract infections, can create disorientation, and sometimes folks are misdiagnosed. Thyroid problems, vitamin deficiency, also medication side effects as we get older. I think the average number of medications is like 5 to 7 for folks over 70. That's tremendous. It's a cocktail, and we can actually get cognitive challenges, memory challenges because of the medication. And we can change that, right? We can reduce or tweak the medications. So this is real important, and that's why we need a second or third opinion on what we're living with, so we get a handle on what we're living with. The other important thing for us to think about here is that not all communities are equally challenged with dementia. For example, older African Americans in America live with twice the prevalence than older white communities, twice the prevalence of dementia. Hispanics and Latinx communities have 1.5 times that of older whites. Now this is real important for this whole dementia-friendly movement, because it means that we need to reach out to communities that are living with multiple challenges because of lack of access to resources. And also we have to be really culturally specific. We have to be culturally sensitive. Some cultures, believe it or not, don't even have a word for dementia. It doesn't mean that folks in their communities aren't living with disorientation and cognitive challenges, but they label things differently and they also respond differently. So what's also important is that folks living with dementia often have comorbidities or other challenges that they're living with at the same time. So for example, with dementia, coronary heart disease, diabetes, hypertension are often common. So if you're living in a culture where diabetes is prevalence has a high prevalence, there's a very good chance that you could be living with a comorbidity, or that you can, or that you can also work on prevention around dementia, because that's very much on the radar. Let's see, what else here? So the Alzheimer's Association every year puts out posters with statistics. I'm not going to go through all of them, but if you want to do a deeper dive and get a better understanding of how dementia is impacting our communities and also individuals, I refer you to the Alzheimer's Association, the annual facts and figures you can find on their website. But you can see here in the upper left-hand corner, 1 in 3 individuals are dying from Alzheimer's. Their numbers, so you know, are really underestimates, because if you remember the umbrella, their numbers mostly catch the Alzheimer's disease numbers. So they're underestimates of folks who are living with the broader umbrella, the broader dementia. Also, their statistics show the community impact. It talks about the cost, $257 billion per year. And it also talks about the caregivers, the number of caregivers, like now we're saying care partners, supporting folks living with dementia, what it costs them in time. And if any of you, most of us have been a caregiver, care partner in our life, or we will be, as Rosalind Carter says. But we're juggling work, family, and caregiving, care partnering. I know some folks, I've heard stories of workers having to go into the restrooms, you know, to call their loved ones and check on their loved ones so their supervisor doesn't know that they're juggling this. This is captured in the statistics in terms of the cost, hours, but also financially to the individual and to society. So here's an example of those figures. Again, I said earlier, 1 in 9 folks 65 years and older are living with Alzheimer's. You also see that it's not declining, right? So the trajectory is an increase by 2050. We're expecting that number, $6.2 million. 6.2 million Americans are living with Alzheimer's in 2021. We're expecting that to double, more than double, by 2050. 12.7 million Americans 65 and older will be living with Alzheimer's. Again, an undercount for the dementia. Now, Maryland, Alzheimer's Association, of Greater Maryland also has a similar chart that you can access. We know that there's more than 110,000 folks living with Alzheimer's in Maryland, and we're expecting a 18.2% increase by 2025, so that there'll be 130,000 folks. So look around us here, on the screen and in our own lives. And again, not to create fear, because I think these do generate fear, but just so that we know that this demographic press is a public health issue. World Health Organization frames dementia that way now, as a public health issue, demanding and requiring and deserving a dementia-friendly initiative that responds and shows up for it. A hopeful note is, in this diagram, you can see a depiction of what's being called the social determinants of health. It's jargon, but it's really helpful, because it says that our health is determined not just by our genetics. If that were the case, I'd be in big trouble, right? With both of my parents living and passing with dementia. The hope is, and the knowledge is, that actually our health is determined by our environment and by our choices and lifestyle. So here's an example of our environment, the different things that influence our health: education, our access to health and healthcare, our neighborhoods, our built environments, whether they're safe or not. Surely our economic stability, can we pay for our medications? Can we enter trials for dementia? So the hopeful note in this is that I heard somewhere, actually not somewhere, but by Dr. Rudolph Tanzi and Dr. Deepak Chopra in a presentation on brain health, they said that only 5% of brain disease and also other chronic diseases are determined by genetics. The rest are determined by these social determinants of health, by our environment. Why am I hopeful about that? That means that if we come together around a dementia-friendly initiative, we can look at our environment and make changes, right? That means that 95% of the inflammation and stress that leads to chronic disease, including dementia, is created by our environment. To me, that's really hopeful, because it means that we can work together as a community to intervene and also create our future together. All right, so what does this look like to come together and to work on that environment? This is a picture of a dementia-friendly community offered to us by Dementia Friendly America. And that's the model that we're following here in Baltimore County. I have written here, no one is an island. Dementia resiliency requires community, and that's what we're talking about. Just like we can't get rid of cancer, even though now we're coming up with better treatments and some prevention, we don't have a cure for dementia. But just as we've developed with cancer, we have great resiliency, right? As individuals and also as communities. Folks, for the most part, are no longer shamed or isolated when they're living with cancer. In fact, we have cancer walks, we have pink ribbons. If you look at the word cloud for cancer, it's not anywhere near the darkness of the word cloud for dementia. So we can do this shift. We can create dementia resiliency, but it requires community. So let's take a minute to look at this photo. You see all the touch points in our community, right? Down the bottom, you see the fire truck, and then working our way clockwise, you see City Hall, you have local government, you see the hospital. In the middle, you have a kiosk or a gazebo, right? So you have parks and recreation. You also have a faith community. You have, what else do we have here? Anyway, every single touch point, you have grocery stores and banks. At every point, that exuberant person, remember we started with them, that exuberant person can navigate, and be supported in their faith community. The services can be slower, more friendly. The rituals can be laden or full with traditional music, because they're saying that traditional music, our music from when we're 13 years old is what they say really stays with us. So I'm working on my playlist from my 13-year-old time. And that's true with the religious themes that folks, the research is showing, don't lose that. How about banking? How can that be more supportive? My father used to be like ritually shamed when he'd forget his PIN. We'd go in and they'd say in front of everyone, "Donald, not again, you've forgotten your PIN." How about instead, if the bank tellers are trained in the dementia-friendly approach, they say, Donald and your daughter Emily, come on in, let's have a cup of coffee. Sit down. Within 15 minutes, he has his PIN, he feels valued. They have his money, he can continue banking, and he also has a sense of purpose. For him as a mathematician, numbers are important and money was important. Managing his money for many of us is really important. So we need that support, and in a very human, respectful way. All right, so join us. This is an invitation to ask you to join this initiative. We're using something called appreciative inquiry, not to throw around a lot of jargon at all, but to say that this means that we start with a strength-based approach. We're looking at Baltimore County and saying, what are the resources that we already have in place? And what are our strengths? And also, what do we vision? What do we want that picture to look like? Where are our faith communities? What do they look like in our day-to-day lives? Where are our YMCAs, our fitness centers? Where do our children go to school? Where do they play? What are our parks and recreations like? What are our strengths? We have so much here in Baltimore County. And then we visualize the gaps. We say, what else could we do? What's missing? But we start with this appreciative inquiry. It's used all around the world for planning and development because the glass is half full when you start, and that's real important. So join us December 8th. We're having our launch. It's going to be virtual and it's free. So stay tuned, reach out to us for more information if you'd like. We will have Dr. Peter Rabins joining us. He is the world-renowned author of The 36 Hour Supporting Caregivers, and he has a new book called Is It Dementia? And so he will be our keynote, but then we will also hear this part. We will hear what strengths and resources we have in our community. We will hear from Johns Hopkins. We will hear from Towson. We will hear from Cromwell Valley Park, We'll hear from the Department of Aging, and it's hosted by the library. So we will start this conversation. We will be eventually breaking out into conversation rooms virtually, and we'll start thinking, what can we do to show up for dementia and to support our loved ones living with dementia. So I think I'm going to stop here. You'll have my contact information, and I am housed, as I said, you can reach me through the Baltimore County Department of Aging, the Caregivers Program. Again, my name's Emily Kearns, and I look forward to working with you. We have nature programs, we have educational programs, and we have consultations to support you if you're living with dementia and cognitive challenges, but also your care partners. dementia affects the system, as we said, the family system and the community system, and we're here as and part of all of it. Thank you very much.